the mountains and into India, because the Chinese, who had been occupying Tibet for some time at that point, really changed their tactics on what they could accept in terms of Buddhist practices, right? Because they were in effect antithetical to communist teaching, right? So, and so they found it necessary to restrict access to temples, all kinds of things. I'm trying to remember his, it's kind of a biography or an autobiography. It's a biography called like Into the Mountains or Into the Night, or I can't remember it now, but it's very interesting read about the process by which the intrigue leading up to what happened when they decided to flee, and then how they fled, and then how they set up in India the head of this kind of Buddhist practices. I'm not an expert in Buddhism at all. I know that there are several kinds. There's the kind they practiced in Vietnam, if you know Thich Nhat Hanh, that was the kind of Buddhism he practiced, or the kind the Dalai Lama is Tibetan Buddhism. And then there are several other kinds, and around the world and around the country, you know, there'll be different people who practice based on who their teacher was. The teacher is the leader. In any case, so what you have over there are some handouts. About them, and we know a great deal about Bishop Tutu, and may he rest in peace. He recently died in the beginning of the new year. Bishop Tutu's own. So why I'm saying this is that there's a bunch of suffering in both of these men's life. This is the key to these first several chapters. This how suffering leads us to embrace joy. And that we, not necessarily that we need to make ourselves suffer, just that suffer, which we do anyway in the Western world. That's kind of our gift and talent, making our own suffering. But there is also suffering that comes through illness, death, displacement, things that we can do very little about, right? I had a child who was born extraordinarily prematurely. He's fine. He's 30 years old. But, you know, in those first days, there was a lot of suffering on his part, because can you imagine you're a 2-pound baby and they're poking you and, you know, forever taking your blood out of your little tiny heel and all that stuff and sticking tubes in and all that. And then for this mom and daddy who don't know anything about anything, you know, I've been to the hospital to have a baby. Was my extent of medical stuff. So it was a lot of suffering. But I do know that in our life together, and then having that shared suffering, what that meant for us as a family. And in some families that can mean like, we know too much about each other, now we're going to go our separate ways. I mean, that happens. Everybody's, you know, you guys are laughing because you know it's true. And so there's that, but it gives us whatever that first pillar of joy is, which is, anybody tell me the first pillar of joy? Perspective, right? It gives us perspective. Now, not in the way my mama did it, which was like, I had a tooth pulled this week, y'all, which is embarrassing enough in and of itself. But anyway, but what my mom said when I called her was, at least it's not in the front. Yeah. Okay, so there's my mom's idea of perspective, right? Which is fine. I really just wanted her to say, oh, baby. But she didn't do it, because that's never been my mom. And as my kids said, well, what did you think Nana would say? You know? So apparently it's well known, right? So I shouldn't be surprised. Even at 60, almost 64, I'm still surprised. So there's the perspective that we get in humility. So it's not denigrating our own sorrows. It's not dismissing our own hurts. It's also acknowledge. It's a both and, acknowledging when we see someone else. I think the Dalai Lama shared that story of being late to some event or something, and he sees a beggar on the side of the road. And here he's worried about these things that he has to get accomplished from his car. You know, it gives him perspective. It gives us, it doesn't say you're not still upset that you're late, or that you might miss an airplane, or that you can't do what you wanted to do, intended to do, but you have this, you're aware that it's not, you don't exist in some bubble. There's not isolation. We live in the same community with ant people. And I think that's the perspective. And Bishop Tutu's perspective on suffering is what he saw in his own home country. He was born in South Africa. He was born into a system of terrible apartheid, where the color of his skin marked him for life, for all kinds of trials and tribulations. And from there, and his friends were imprisoned or killed, but he went on from there to do many things with his life. So, welcome, Irv and Eleanor.
We're going to another room.
And now they disappear on me. Okay. So, so how do you remember from the book how they defined joy? Which is kind of key. If the book is the book of joy, how do they define joy? What do you think? If you didn't read, can you make something up? Would you rather be more comfortable talking at your table instead of talking to me? This is right away. They go right into this. Remember, this is the recording of their conversations. They start off by saying, I love this chapter. Why are you not morose? Right? All the things that have happened to them. It could be. Then they had a lot of things. Yes, ma'am. And they could have been a lot of ways. And they're not. They are not.
Unlike the two men and their relationship with each other, they know each other and enjoy each other as real people, and how they think and feel, and they have joy in their friendship, and they make fun and they laugh, and it was enjoyable to read.
They were very comfortable with each other. This isn't their first meeting. They have met before, right? They have spent time together before. There's a playfulness that I would not have anticipated. So they go to a great length to describe what joy is not, a little bit, right? We can say, I think we know that joy is not happiness. Not that we shan't be happy or can't be happy or won't be happy. Something deeper about joy.
It's not really a feeling or an emotion.
That's right. Thank you, Ginger.
It's a state of being.
The state of being. And they talk about some examples of maybe what joy is. I think it's, Bishop Tutu does have children. The Dalai Lama does not, and the Dalai Lama has never been in a physical or emotion or intimate relationship with someone of the opposite sex. So
that's one of the things he gave up.
Yes, right.
Being the Dalai Lama.
Yeah.
And when he said he had given up sex, the Archbishop, did you say that?
Yes, he did. But Bishop Tutu, I think, talks about seeing a child, having a child, that kind of emotional, which is emotion, but that it's a whole body experience, I think. But it's hard to relate to if you haven't had children or you don't, you haven't been in that kind of setting. I wonder if there's another kind of setting that they could talk about the joy. I'm looking for my notes. I mean, really, all we were covering today is these first few chapters. So the Archbishop says that ultimately our greatest joy is when we seek to do good for others. And as I look around the room, when I look and see most of you, that is really how you've spent your lives, or at least how I understand your lives in this place. So it makes sense that this, to me, is a joyful place, right? That is what I get every time I come in the door. It's what I felt when I came here to interview, and it continues to be what I feel working here. So I don't know that we can fake that, and if we did, I'm not sure how long we could fake it.
Well, Allison, I think it's interesting that they say the ultimate source of happiness is within us. But yet then it would go on to say that too much, it's not like self-centered thinking. They say too much self-centered thinking is the source of our suffering. So it is that compassion for others and looking outside of yourself that leads to that joy.
Yeah, and when we, in our tradition, when we say, love your neighbor as you love yourself, I think there's a connection between that word, like that. Doing our own work, we say, if you're using the psychological parlance, right? Doing our own work first allows us to be able to engage in that other work, right? Too much of that leads us down kind of a, is our circle going out, or is it going the other direction? Like, is the spiral going deeper in ourselves, which can lead to suffering, right? And unnecessary suffering, which is kind of where I was going with my sermon this morning. There's just our journeys can lead us to examine it, but then the whole point in examining those things is that we move outward, right? It's not just an end unto itself at all. Thank you for that. So different than, don't worry, be happy, right? Which is kind of, which is great. And those are catchy tunes. And I love that song. And I love that other song by Pharrell Williams, be happy, who doesn't love that song? Those are joyful and catchy tunes and all that. But there's something deeper that we're, or is it immediate gratification, right? There's a lot. Look, I am almost addicted to ice cream, right? Like, even if it's in like a small, like years ago, I went to the small little Dove bar things. Well, if you eat 6, I just have the big bowl of ice cream with stuff on top of it, right? But it makes me happy until my stomach hurts. Yeah, I see some acknowledgement about it. So I have to be careful about wanting to engage in things that make me happy, as opposed to things that might bring me joy. Right? And I think the bringing me joy part probably might be a little deeper, might require a little bit more reflection on my part. I call myself a contemplative because I enjoy that form of prayer, quiet prayer, silence and all that. But I fight it. Maybe that's why I enjoy it, because it's so much more. I would much rather watch, this is like ice cream, all the episodes of Inventing Anna on Netflix instead of just watching one. It's my obsessions or my addictions are probably a little bit more healthy than my parents, but they're still there, right? They're still a part of kind of, well, if one is good, 7 must be amazing. That's not true. And I think this other thing is that we see ourselves, the perspective that's, as it's related to joy, means that we are connected to each other, not better than. And I find this is, maybe that's not your story, but I do find that's difficult for me too. I think there's a hierarchy in my brain and it's always working. It's like, oh, well, at least I'm not as bad as that. And at least I'm not as bad as that. Oh, I feel better about myself. Like, that's why I think I listen to true crime podcasts, because I think like, well, I didn't murder anyone. So, So here, I would like to, maybe you guys could talk a little bit about this at your tables. I'm trying to find some way to engage you with each other, because I can sit here and talk about the book or my own life, which is fascinating. But, you know, I really want to find a time for you all to connect with each other, right? That's better than anything I could say. So here's this thing that the Dalai Lama said. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. Talk amongst yourselves. Come on, you can do it. Just 5 minutes. All right, my friends, and wherever you are, I see your, I can't hear you. Hold on. Now can you hear me?
But we can hear you.
Oh, Eleanor, I can't hear you.
Oh, okay.
We're in Mexico.
Yes, we're
Maybe
not.
it's this machine.
Can you hear me now?
Can you hear us? Okay. Forget about it.
Can't hear you all.
It's okay.
Okay. You two talk to each other.
We will.
Um,
I can turn it around in a minute and let you see who's in the room.
Can you hear me now?
The way we react to
Pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional.
it, it's the way we react to pain. If we can consider suffering, make the best of it.
Hold on. The way you approach the world, it's like.
For instance, you experienced hunger, I wanted to come to you. For me, that was a way of being kind and generous to them. What did they? Oh, first people.
Crying in the hallway.
And I've been saying on the street. Paying for that.
That's just the best thing I think we should do. Plant. How's bees a plant?
Good.
That you're stuck.
Chuck said this morning.
I mean, have you done that?
said, no, you're the queen. At least one time.
Part of your life.
Which I thought, I guess that gives them joy. That's good to know. Back to my thing that I want to share.
Okay, one more minute, maybe?
He said that the parents duty that every day, much of the day, and that one
Alter Dill? You have another job?
Yeah. Catherine, I've got coffee hour this morning, so I'm setting up and then I've got the
We're gonna try to, we're sort of launch to the conference, but we're gonna do it in the vestry room. So it shouldn't interfere with your coffee hour. It's all, we're bringing it in. I just wanted to let you know. I know,
Or you have to.
sorry, that is, you should have, and you've been fine, but
She has done it.
I don't.
It's very simple.
And it should be. And help me sometimes. Yeah. I think so. Right. I did, and I thought it was just for me. All right, let's come back together, okay? And I hope that that was that put some other people's conversation, helped to stimulate something in your own life or your own way of knowing. I think one of the other things I want to talk about, because we're going to also spend some time doing the practices for joy that are in the back of the book. So we're going to give some practice to that. So I want to leave enough time for that, because to me it's as important as the words. So what stood out for me is that there are 3 things that create joy. And I can't remember what page this is on, but it's in the chapter, Nothing Beautiful Comes Without Some Suffering. So does anyone know what the first way about creating some joy is? To reframe
The perspective.
our own situation more positively. Right, that's the first thing. Does that mean ignoring it? Does that mean just putting on a happy face and walking away? Or does that mean denial? I don't think so, right? Because we might be skilled at that, right? We might be very skilled at that. And that might indeed keep us from ever experiencing joy. So it's not denying it, it's trying to reframe it. And again, it's not ignoring it, it's not comparing it to someone else's pain, it's to try to reframe it. And I'm hoping that you're thinking of how can we make this more than words on a page? I hope that when I'm saying these words, you're thinking, oh, that's like the time I blank, right? It may not come to you today. You may be like me and be sitting, I hate it when you sit in the space and everybody's got something to say and I'm the one going, I've never had a time like that. I don't know of any time that's ever happened to me. I've never done anything like that until I go home and I'm relaxed and I'm like, oh, that time. Oh yeah, I did it. So I know that we don't all, not everything is right here in our frontal lobe where we can just spit it out. I know that for sure. I know that. I've been looking at this book for 6 weeks, trying to figure out how to teach it. So number 2, it's experiencing gratitude. So 1, reframing our suffering or our situation, doesn't have to be suffering, reframing our situation more positively and experiencing gratitude. There's been so much work in this. For the last 20 years, there's been so much work in this gratitude thing. I remember keeping my first gratitude journal like over 20 years ago, right? And I've done it again and again and again. Because we get busy and we get whatever, and it's hard to think about, or something terrible happens. And how do you see the gratitude in that? right? It's hard to do that. So welcome. So we're discussing the Book of Joy. Mhm. And masks are optional if you feel comfortable. So there we go. Reframing, gratitude, and the third one is choosing kindness and generosity. And again, for some people, I think that does come more naturally than others. And I don't think there's anything wrong if it isn't your first response. Like this isn't a chance to be like, I'm the worst person ever. I never think about kindness in general. I don't. I mean, I have to stop and consider it. Like it doesn't, just because I'm a priest, it just doesn't come naturally. I have had to work more. It's been something, but you know what? It does arise. I think there's a reason, there's an order to these first 3 steps. I do think they're connected, but I do think one can lead to the next. You know what? They feed on each other. They help each other. They support each other. Much like who you choose to spend your time with helps support that in you. You know that. I used to say it to my kids all the time. Well, maybe it's that friend, you know. I didn't try to put all the emphasis on the friends, but you know, sometimes it is. It's kind of what are we surrounding ourselves with? How are we doing that? Making those changes can be hard, but at least these are 3 positive ways. So choosing kindness and generosity rather than what? Stinginess and ill will. You know, when you say it like that, well, who wants to choose ill will and stinginess? No one sets out in the morning to be that person, for sure. I don't think. You can't be, I mean, unless you're that miserable, you know. I mean, there are days I don't feel all that kind, but isn't it amazing? We have to choose it, but we do. So here's one more, and I think we're just going to go to because I don't want to run out of time, and I am the only person leading worship today. So I really want to give myself like 5 minutes to center myself a bit. Yes, get my act together is right. I don't have to change my clothes, but I'm wondering if you have your book with you and you go to page 300 and I think it's 9. Yes. Developing mental immunity. This really fits, doesn't it, with this whole idea of how we reframe our lives, or the things that are
page number
309. All right, so it's not suggested that everybody, it's not, I'm going to read from page 309, so if you don't have the book, okay? But it's not suggesting that you might already have all these things. So I hope that no one leaves here today kind of flogging yourself that you somehow you don't have these skills, or something, you've missed the boat or the train or the teaching. But it's related. The practices are related to how we can reframe, how we can be kind, how we can be grateful, right? So this is what these practices are.
I'm coming back.
During the week, as the Dalai Lama and the Archbishop joked about who got up too early and who was praying and meditating too much, it was clear that both believed strongly that spiritual practices were the essential ground of their being, sustaining and supporting them through their lives. These daily times of prayer and meditation kept these 2 masters in spiritual alignment. I thought about what the Archbishop had said about the greater importance of these practices for those who are not spiritual teachers, but who must live and die in the blur and buzz of the marketplace. So he recognizes that he lives in sort of an isolated bubble, right? Both of those men live in sort of a protected sphere, and how hard it must be for folks who have to get up every morning, tie their own shoes. I mean, they tie their shoes, but you know what I mean. No one's making the Dalai Lama, everyone's making the Dalai Lama breakfast. He's not responsible for making breakfast for anyone else, as most people in this room are, okay? So he's some simple practices to overcome obstacles to joy, but recognizing there are obstacles, and support the 8 pillars. So anyway, that go on to say, we bookended this section with practices that Tibetan Buddhist monks typically do at the beginning and ending of each day. The other practices can be tried on a regular basis or when needed. Like physical exercise, spiritual practices are not ends in themselves. They exist to support our mental health, and here's the word again, mental immunity. The more we practice, the more we benefit. There is no spiritual competition. Do whatever you need to adapt them to your life for maximum benefit. Remember, the Dalai Lama adapted his morning practice to accommodate his aging needs. I think that's a great example. As the Dalai Lama said, he finds the science, so there's a whole section in that first part about how neuroscience is now, lining up with spiritual practices. And these are not the only people that are doing that work. Cynthia Bourgeois, who's a modern contemplative who works with Richard Rohr and worked with Thomas Keating. Cynthia Bourgeois has written a whole book about it, which is overwhelming to me. The whole thing about how the brain works and all this is fascinating. If that's kind of the stuff you love and you dig that, you'll find it really interesting. But it's what we have known, those of us who practice that kind of contemplative prayer have known in the practice of it. So we knew it. I didn't have any words for it. I don't know anything about the brain other than what I learned in the 6th grade. That's probably about the height of my stuff about that. Anyway, when he's trying to decide whether to wake up or hit the snooze button, I can't imagine the Dalai Lama hitting the snooze button. Anyway.
Not when he gets up at 3 a.m.
Right, well, maybe. I'm going to start with this paragraph. In our age of instant gratification, any information can be Googled in a matter of seconds, but real knowledge and wisdom take time. These practices reward and deepen through continued effort. Usually when we start meditating or praying, we can experience what the Archbishop has called spiritual sweets, or the tingling and calming that comes from beginning to pay attention to our inner life. Like sweets, they are tasty, but the real benefits occur as we create a temporal container into which we can pour our heart and soul as we experience the joys and sorrows of life. The nature of contemplative life is that it is very personal, and not all practices work for all people. Find what works best for you. What is presented here are simply sample practices, including many that the Dalai Lama and the Archbishop use. We hope these will inspire your own practices. So again, a template, but it's not rigorous, only in the way you choose to practice it, okay? So morning intention setting, and many of you may already do that for years. These are not new things at all. There's nothing new here. It's not like you have to learn how to do a yoga pose and hold it for 2.5 hours. There's nothing like that. Every conscious action begins with intention. I can go along with that, which is simply setting goals. Now, if there's anything that we understand as Western Americans, it's goal setting. If we've worked in any industry for any amount of time, goal setting is in that column. But I don't care whether they're meaningful and then achievable, and you guys have done all the work. We've all been to all the conferences. We've done all that. Many Tibetan monks do it every morning, and it's a way of preparing their hearts and minds for how they wish to face the day. They also check in regularly with how it's going. There's somebody else that did this. Ignatian did it the same way. Saint Ignatius did it this way too in the 1500s. So it's not new. Tibetans have been doing it. Tibetan monks, Buddhist practices have been doing it probably even before that. So the Archbishop celebrates the Eucharist every morning, which involves reading and on Bible passages, right? He observes the liturgy of the hours, which is what we find in our prayer book. Prayers for morning, noon, night, before we go to bed. That's condensed in our Book of Common Prayer. And with each of those liturgies, there are a cycle of readings from Scripture, right? It really is all in the book. He also likes to read passages from great mystics to guide his heart and mind. So say you're, I don't know, say you're I'm trying to think of things, a chemist, a nuclear physicist. How would you would study the people who had been successful in nuclear work, right? That makes sense. So this is just Bishop Tutu also studying the people who have practiced what they preached, who have walked in the walk and talked the talk, right? So that's just that. So here's the practice. You ready? I'm going to read it while you all do it. Sit comfortably in a chair with the soles of your feet on the ground. You can do this exercise while lying in bed, which I love, before getting up in the morning. So after the alarm goes off and before the rush of your day has begun, rest your hands on your legs or your belly. So if you're lying down, you can see it. Close your eyes and take several long breaths through your nose. If your hands are on your stomach, you'll be able to feel it rise and fall from your diaphragm, that muscle that controls how much air we take in. Now ask yourself, what is my heart's desire? What do I wish for myself, my loved ones, and for the world? Our deepest desires usually lie beyond our temporary wishes and wants. They are likely to involve living with profound human values that lead to our great happiness, calling us back to our place within the fabric of life. The Dalai Lama has a simple way of testing our intentions. Is it just for me or for others? For the benefit of a few or for the many? Is it about now or for the future? Maybe this litmus test can help guide us toward what we truly wish for. Then state your intention for the day. For example, today, may I greet everyone with the love that is in my heart. Or today, may I be less judgmental. Or today, may I be patient and loving with my children. It can be specific or it can be general. If you don't know your intention, you can repeat the following 4 lines adapted from the traditional Tibetan prayer of the 4 immeasurables, which has guided many on their journey to more compassion and greater happiness. May all beings attain happiness. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings never be separated from joy. May all beings abide in equanimity. So simple in its intent, harder in its practice, but you can see that it might take 3 minutes. Maybe you could spend longer in that, right? But maybe for this week, see how it goes. I'd love to hear about it next Sunday when we gather together, right? Yes, sir.